I never expected to be here, standing on the brink of everything I thought I knew, everything I once loved. My name is Ely Divid, and the betrayal I've faced is almost too much to comprehend. My family, the people I trusted most, rejected me. But what happened next was far more shocking than the betrayal itself. I was forced into a marriage for money, a deal that shattered my world. And then, something I never could have predicted happened. I fell in love with the very man who destroyed everything I held dear. A man who tore apart my family's empire. It's a twisted tale, one I could never have imagined. How do you reconcile falling for the one who destroyed your world? How do you live with that truth? As the silence between us grows, I find myself asking, was this inevitable? Or did my choices lead me here? Was I just a pawn in a game, or did I allow myself to become one? My life has become a tangled mess of decisions, each more painful and complicated than the last. And now I must face the consequences. But the real question remains, will I ever truly forgive him? Or will the weight of this betrayal haunt me forever? The truth is darker and more complex than I ever could have imagined. And the storm that's coming? I don't know if I'm ready to face it. Growing up, I was always the quiet one, the dutiful daughter. My family was powerful, untouchable even, with wealth and influence that spanned generations. My father built an empire, and my older brother, Amir, was set to take over. I, on the other hand, had one job: to marry well and preserve the family's legacy. It was a simple life, or so I thought. But that changed the moment my parents sat me down and told me about the arrangement they had made for me. I was to marry Aram, a man I had never met, a stranger whose wealth could only make my family's influence grow stronger. It was a deal, nothing more, nothing less. My heart didn't matter. My feelings didn't matter. My family made it clear that this was for the greater good. At first, I resisted. How could they ask me to give up my freedom, my happiness, for some business deal? But the pressure was too much. My parents, especially my mother, had pinned all their hopes on this union. They told me it was the only way forward, that it was my duty. I gave in. Aram, though, wasn't like I expected. He was ruthless, calculating, and emotionally distant. But there was something about him that drew me in, something darker, more complicated. I hated him for what he was doing to my family, but at the same time, I found myself fascinated by him. His ambition was undeniable, and despite his coldness, I saw a kind of raw vulnerability in him that no one else saw. It wasn't love, it couldn't be, but it was something deeper, and I couldn't ignore it. The first few months of our marriage were unbearable. I lived in a grand house, surrounded by wealth I had never known, but it felt empty. My family, my parents, my brother, avoided me, blaming me for what had happened to the business. I became a symbol of their failure. My life, once full of possibilities, had now become a cage. But then, the betrayal came. Aram's greed, his hunger for more power, didn't just threaten our family business. It destroyed it. He made decisions without consulting anyone, cut deals that were supposed to be off-limits, and before we knew it, our empire was crumbling. My father, once a proud man, was reduced to nothing. I felt like I was drowning in the ashes of my family's empire. But the worst part? I couldn't escape. I had already married him, the man who destroyed everything. In the months that followed, everything changed. My family disowned me, blaming me for the downfall of the business. I was no longer their daughter. I was the one who had betrayed them. The hurt was unbearable, but I knew I had to survive. I couldn't let myself fall apart, no matter how much it hurt. Aram, on the other hand, was distant, wrapped up in his own struggles. Yet, strangely, his coldness became a kind of comfort. I no longer had to pretend to be someone I wasn't. I was simply surviving. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was my own person. I started to build a life for myself, despite the devastation. I found new friends who helped me heal, people who didn't care about my last name or my family's fortune. They cared about me. But the shadows of the past never really left. Every time I looked at Aram, I saw the man who had torn my family apart. Yet every time I looked at him, I also saw someone who understood my pain. In his eyes, I saw the same emptiness, the same hunger. He wasn't just my husband anymore. He was a reflection of everything I had lost. I began to find strength in the unlikeliest of places. Aram, despite all his flaws, was teaching me something I hadn't known I needed: independence. His indifference toward me made me realize that no one, not even family, could define my worth. Slowly, I rebuilt my confidence. I pursued my passions, started my own ventures, and grew into someone I could be proud of. There were nights I doubted my choices. Had I made the right decision? Was I letting anger and bitterness cloud my judgment? And then there were moments where I felt empowered. I had escaped my family's expectations. I had built a life, one that didn't revolve around what they wanted, but what I needed. And yet, there was always that nagging voice. Was this the life I truly wanted? Was Aram worth all the destruction? But in the midst of this self-doubt, something unexpected happened. Aram and I began to connect in a way I had never anticipated. The coldness between us thawed, but it was complicated. There was still anger on both sides, but there was something else too. A quiet understanding, a shared pain. The betrayal still loomed over us, but in its shadow, we began to find common ground. The tension between what I felt and what I had to face was building. I knew that sooner or later, I would have to confront my past. The family I had once loved, the family I had once belonged to, would never forgive me. And yet it was time. Time to face them. Time to show them who I had become. The confrontation came when I least expected it. My family, my parents, reached out after years of silence. It was an invitation, an attempt at reconciliation. But I knew better. This wasn't about forgiveness. This was about control. They wanted me back, to bring the family together again. But I had changed. I wasn't the same girl who had married for their benefit. I had a voice now. I had strength. And I wasn't afraid to use it. Walking into that room, seeing my family once more, felt surreal. They looked at me as though I had betrayed them, but I didn't flinch. I stood tall. "You destroyed everything," my father said, his voice cold and accusing. "You ruined us." I took a deep breath, holding my ground. "No, Father. You did. You chose money over family, over me. And that was your mistake." Aram stood behind me, silent but steady. He had no place in this, but his presence was a reminder of everything I had become. The anger, the hurt, and the betrayal were all there, raw and unfiltered. But I didn't back down. "You think you've done enough?" my mother whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You think this is all you deserve?" "I think I deserve to be free," I said, my voice firm. "And I will no longer live under your shadow." In that moment, the truth was out. The family I had once loved wasn't the same anymore. They had been broken by their own actions. And I had been part of that destruction, but now I was rebuilding. Alone. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. The confrontation didn't end in the dramatic reconciliation my parents had hoped for. There were no apologies, no forgiveness. The weight of our past still hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. But I walked away, not as the girl who had been discarded, but as someone who had finally found her own way. I looked at Aram as we left the room together. He wasn't the villain I had once painted him to be, but he wasn't the hero either. He was just a man who, like me, had been caught in a web of choices, mistakes, and regrets. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about rebuilding what had been lost. It was about reclaiming who I was, who I had always been. I had learned that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight with ourselves. And when we finally emerge victorious, it's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of something new. My family may never understand. They may never forgive me. But I've found peace, not in their acceptance, but in my own. The journey has been painful, but it's also been a lesson. A lesson in standing up for yourself, no matter the cost. And now, as I look forward, I can't help but wonder, what's next for me? What other battles will I face? But no matter the answer, I know one thing for sure. This time, I'm in control.